Το όνομα είναι CELESTE THEOPHILOS. Ελληνικά it's Ουρανία Θεοφίλου, originally Theophilopulos. And I was born in Jackson Heights, New York, and raised there.
And your parents?
And my mother was born in Smyrna, and she came as a very, very young child to New York with her brother and her mother. And my father was born at the top of Taigetos mountain in Loganiko, which is outside of Sparti. Both languages were spoken at home because although my mother spoke Greek fluently, English was actually easier for her because she came so young here. And she was friends and lived with other Greeks like herself, but some of them were actually already second generation. Their mother, which were old women at that point, were born here. So that's how far back they went. In fact, she lived up in Harlem, in the Heights, Washington Heights, where a lot of the first immigrant Greeks lived, in parts of Manhattan and Harlem. Both, but I would think even more for convenience at that point, which I don't know how convenient, because instead of an F he put PH, and that's been a problem ever since for the Theophilos.
Right?
He was a businessman, and we exported textiles from as far back as the 1950s, and he was really the only Greek in the business. It was specifically, that business was primarily Jewish New Yorkers, and he assimilated very well, and he liked them and they liked him, and he became very successful at it for many years. He had an accent. He spoke very good English, but not fluent English at the time. But in business, it's a language that everybody was understanding between them. It was not a matter of the actual language anymore. I would say they had acquaintances that were not Greek, but the friends were always Greek. Growing up, my closest circle was mostly Greek Americans. Then as I got older, high school, college, I had some very close, and to this day, non-Greeks altogether. And then as I got into college and older, that's really when I began to have close friends that were Greek, not Greek American. Again, both. It's kind of like an inside bond when we want to make a joke or talk about something that's very typically Greek. We'll go into the Greek. If it's just fast and off the top of your head, it's going to be English. Although I have to say that when I went to kindergarten, I didn't speak any English. I didn't understand the teacher. So I always found that interesting. I think I'm very typically Greek in that I am what I am depending with who I am. So when I am with Greeks, I tend to justify certain American traits. When I am with Americans, I justify Greek traits. It's it's kind of hard. It's kind of defending two houses. So when you're in the opposite house, you tend to defend the other house. There was a huge continuity, but again, as a sideline, I went to 8 years of Greek parochial school. So that the fact that they wanted me there is an answer to the question, but the fact that I did go there enhanced the whole experience of being Greek, total immersion. Although a lot of kids were in that school and never really, and came out never really identifying in any way. But I did. It seems my circle, my family, everything was very much Greek. It was spoken in positive terms, not with bad memories, but it was never even a consideration to move back. I believe most of my parents' generation were not looking to move back, unlike the generation afterwards, simply because they did go through wars, through famine, but aside from that, they came here. It was very comfortable, and they assimilated very well. They found other Greeks, other Greek Americans. They were successful. I think it has a lot to do with being successful in your work, no matter what the work is, because it brings a certain amount of peace and happiness so that you can appreciate where you are. I really believe that it had a lot to do with the fact that they did well and therefore lived well. So they never badmouthed Greece. We went every year religiously. And when I was there, as I got older, I could walk around the streets of Athens and I knew, like I did Manhattan, I knew how to walk around by myself and get around by myself. So I was very familiar. It was second home, but never quite completely a second home, because there was still a culture shock for me in the 60s, in the 70s. It was later when I felt that gap close, and I wasn't such a culture shock for me. But my parents were very happy to be there for vacation. We also had friends and family visiting from Greece here, and they too became familiar with New York. But there were a lot of different experiences. I think that in my case, because my father exported textiles, he traveled all over the world. So we were exposed to a lot of different cultures and able to, he assimilated easily, I think. But in fact, it was just for an anecdote. Very often I would think of Lucy and Ricky, because my father would say things. My mother would make fun of the way he pronounced the word exactly like that. And I can say, growing up in that generation, it was very much like them. The same time they bought the new car, the same time they got on the planes to go to Greece with the propellers. So it was quite funny to identify that way.
Tell us about this place.
This place has a history also. This is Southold, even though this whole tip of the island is part of Southold. The Greeks know it as Greenport, and in the old days, Greekport, because once the ship owners found it and built big houses down on the corner, it was very isolated. This house was built. There was Kouloukondis, Livanos, that generation. And in fact, the house that we live in was built by somebody who was in the on the boats as a shipping engineer, as a naval mechanical engineer on the boats, as the house next door. So we grew up very close, this whole block. There were 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 Greeks that we would have guitars outside and singing Greek songs and dancing Greek and having those kind of evenings. And then there was the big rush of more Greeks, the next generation of Greeks.
It's close by the sea and not
They fish, and even the locals became rich from the Greeks because the Greeks were buying the fish with the heads on. The Greeks were buying the tomatoes. The Greeks were buying the potatoes. They couldn't have enough farm stands because of the Greeks that would come out. And they would come for the day, spend the day on the beach. But then as time went on and they became more affluent, now there's a large percentage, I don't want to quote the number because I'm not sure of it, but it is a large percentage of houses that contribute to the tax roll of Southold that are owned by Greeks. It was because I always was somehow active, whether it was, you know, the Vietnam War or this or that. I mean, I was a little bit younger. I was just a touch under the college age kids that were fully in it. But I had a very close cousin who was older, and she was much more active, and she discovered, number one, a film that was being done with Jules Desan representing the whole Polytechnio incident in Greece against the junta, the students, and also a choir that was established at the time with Miki Thodoraki, and many, many friendships came out of that experience. But she was the one who discovered it because she was older, and therefore myself and her younger sister, who was a very close cousin of mine, we went together and we got involved with the film, with the chorus, and with various friendships that were really, there were Greeks, non-Greeks, and Greek Americans. But so many Greeks, and so we established new friendships that lasted. I think the generation after me, unfortunately, is not that interested in politics or literature or that those interests as much, no matter if they're Greek politics, American politics. The younger generation is so techno-drenched. I think we saw some glimmer of light when the young people got involved with the Obama election, and even that was through the computer. So that kind of hands-on participation, I think it's not quite as active in this generation. I mean, it may change, but I don't even think it's about which culture. In general, even in Greece, I think this generation is not as active as our generation was. I think, number one, again, I go back to the language. It seems so superficial, but I think it has a lot to do because I'm going to have to try to explain. When I was a kid, it was a novelty to be Greek. If there was a Greek actor on TV, everybody called up each other. There's a Greek on TV. There's a Greek on, it was a novelty. Or a Greek American politician, from even Dukakis, big deal, big deal. As we assimilate, if the language is lost or certain cultural aspects, I believe we become a lot like a lot of other ethnic groups that are by name only an ethnicity.
Yeah, like
The Italian Americans, the German Americans. It really, maybe a recipe or something is really their identity. So in a way, it's kind of sad because it was fun to be a novelty, a minority, where you will pick out the Greek name and say, oh my gosh, look, there's a Greek there. So it's good because we're getting more successful and more, out there. I think for the size of the country and all of its history and past poverty, I think it's extremely successful compared to other groups, and in the short period of time that they became successful, as opposed to other groups that were here longer or had a little bit more help, I suppose, because of language. It's not, it's a difficult language. Some people might speak Italian, Spanish, French, German. Very difficult to get a Greek translator in those days. So I consider that they are very successful considering all things that they had to deal with. I think that it's the same problem with here, and that is that the system is responsible for creating the people that get hurt by the system. I want to preface that by saying I believe in personal responsibility. But I do believe that even people who are responsible, once the mess is a mess, it's hard to get out of it. By the time you realize that you've been duped or there is an end to some sort of bad road that you didn't realize was a bad road. So I wouldn't point fingers and I wouldn't blame, because it's just a different scale, and it happened here in the States, but there's more of a cushion in the States and they could handle it. There's no cushion in Greece or in Portugal or in Ireland or what have you. So the truth is, it's a bad habit of Greeks and Greek Americans to, just for the sake of discussion sometimes, to badmouth Greeks and Greece and Greece, and they don't work enough, the hands are out, they want this ready. That might have been in the past. The point is now, where you see that there are a lot of big guys that were responsible for a lot of this, I and a lot of my circle feel genuinely and sincerely sorry for what's going on. It's very sad for us. We don't like to see it, hear it. It's very sad. We can't even imagine that that country is going through this kind of a crisis. I think because it's a global crisis, they're preoccupied with their own mortgage, car payment, college payment. I think that's the world we live in right now. It's sad because it's almost like a luxury to be able to think about bigger questions than yourself. I think there will be. Even the next generation, I mean, they get excited that Tom Hanks became a Greek Orthodox, and My Big Fat Greek Wedding was produced by him and his wife, and just they're proud that
But does the community offers opportunities for young Americans to visit or study in Greece or get scholarships or internships in Greece?
They do. I'm not sure about all the programs, but I know that they do have classes in Greece of student abroad classes in Greece that a lot of kids are interested in. And again, I know quite a few Greek American kids. They are religiously every summer in Greece. They have their stekia in Greece. They have their friends in Greece, and they are there many times for the entire summer, just in time to come back to go to class the next day or work the next day. So there is a continuity. There is a continuity. Again, I'm going to go back to the economic crisis. I think it's affecting a lot of the kids that would like to be going more often the last 3-4 years. And they haven't gone either because there's not enough on this end to go, or their connection there, whether it's the house they stay, their friends, whatever it may be. So I think that's affected it that way. But I think there's definitely an identity. If you are, okay, Astoria is an exception, but nevertheless, if you are in Astoria when the Greek national team or the Greek team in the World Cup wins, you'll hear all the Greek American cafes, not the Greek cafes, the Greek American cafes. You'll hear all the yelling and the screaming and the horns honking and the flags flying. It's a genuine, even in Olympics, if there is the Greek team and the American team, the Greek American kids are going for that Greek win. They do have that passion still. The Greeks started moving from Jackson Heights, Corona, where there's still a church, but that was the church for the people in Jackson Heights. It was Corona. All the areas in Astoria, the Greeks started moving to what was the beginning of suburbia, which was Flushing, Whitestone, Bayside, from the 70s. And that continues now, except with the affluence, they're moving to Manhasset, Roslyn, more expensive suburbia. But they will meet in Astoria to go there to eat fish, to go there to drink coffee, to go there to buy the cheese and the olives, because in Long Island they don't have good cheese and olives. So there seems to be a center in Astoria, even if you've moved out. So the young people that are still living there or coming from Bayside, I know young Greek American kids, some of them still live in Astoria, and many of the friends live in Bayside and further out. They'll come in on Friday night to go to that cafe, to that club that has Greek night and it's Greek music. So there is a continuity. It's not as rich and as layered as my generation, but I don't think this generation yet is as rich and layered as my generation. But then every generation thinks that about the next generation. Because again, I don't think it's a Greek issue. It is this generation in America issue. If you're playing video games, even when you're in your 20s and your 30s, or you're watching super, tech movies, or you're able to play with your iPhone or iPad, it's not about Greek culture. It's just culture in general. These kids are not at the museums. They're not reading. They're not at the theater. They're not. It's just, I think it's that transition to get finally bored with the technology and go back. And eventually maybe put down the electronic reader and go back to a book. I think it has to go the full circle. It's just a transition. It's some of the kids are even obsessed, I would say. It's not going to go away. Of course, this is what it is, but it may be, again, a novelty to do something other than anything electrotechnical related, I think.
Do you see yourself that you could live in Greece, stay for extended period of time?
I could stay an extended period of time today. Today, meaning, naturally, I don't know now with the crisis, it's difficult for everybody, but I would say in the last 20 years, from the 80s on, I could stay. Before that, I did have culture shock. I was comfortable, I knew my way around, but I did not feel like home. There was culture shock, whether it was in a conversation with somebody who had never left Greece, or with the shopkeeper who had a certain way of doing things, or the cab driver, or the guy at the periptero. There were things that I could not feel at home with. I mean, it's really just a cultural thing. It's, you know, I guess you're forced, you have no choice. My generation, the generation before, my parents, you come here, everybody has to kind of get along. You can't just push somebody and say, you know, and just get in front of the line. You just can't get away with it. So those things, because I was younger, I couldn't get used to them. But as I got older, it didn't matter anymore because things changed there too, and it was not quite that way anymore. Yeah, it was definitely unsaid, unwritten law. It was an unwritten law. You wouldn't be ostracized if you, I mean, I had friends, or, you know, my parents' friends, kids, if they married someone who wasn't Greek or Greek American, but they would wait to see, make sure it's okay, it works out, that there's no problems, and that sort of thing. A lot of my generation had a little bit of an opposite pressure, in that they were hesitant, or they wanted Greek American, not somebody who'd never been here on their first trip here, or very often when the girls would go to mostly the girls with the guys, when the girls would go to Greece for the summer and fall madly in love and come back with a gambro. They did not like that. They did not want that. There were a lot of people who did, but I would say that I don't want to be derogatory in any way, but I would say the little bit more educated parents preferred that their daughters did not go to Greece to find a husband. My circle, none of them preferred that. They were very wary. Perhaps they had their own baggage coming from there, you know. Whereas today, I think it's very, very different. This generation is very different. I think it's much easier for a Greek American to meet a Greek girl, or a Greek boy to come and meet a Greek American girl. I think they're much more on the same page, on the same level of thinking. Whereas before, there was a definite culture gap, especially between the Greek men and the Greek American girls. There was a big culture gap. In New York, there's not even a question. It's guaranteed, the continuity. Now, the rest of the country, I'm not all that familiar, but I do know that in Chicago they're building museums to Greek culture. The churches, regardless of the religious aspect, just as far as bringing Greeks together, are thriving all over the states. I mean, you're looking the Greek papers and there's festivals, organizations, youth travel groups. Regardless of whether you agree with the basis of it's there. So I have to say, so far, I do believe in the continuity. I don't see it going into disappearing. The truth is that it's a cliche, you know, but I am very proud to be Greek American. I really am. And I grew up, like I said, in Jackson Heights with a very kind of Jewish American culture. So it's interesting to me that I found a lot of similarities growing up. It was very easy. The humor, the attitude, the loudness, it was always much more comfortable than an all-American environment, which was tended to be much more conservative and quiet and serious and all-American. So I'm very proud of being Greek American, and I'm consider I had a very unique and good experience.